joined now by a makeup designer who started off at the BBC in the mid-70s on shows such as Survivors and Butterflies, but would eventually go on to design all sorts, both in the BBC and lastly as a freelancer. And along the way, came into contact with Doctor Who quite a few times. So I'd like to introduce hair and makeup designer Jillian Thomas. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. In lockdown.
Yes, it's a rather odd time, but you've been able to make the most of it with you?
Definitely, yeah. I'm growing for England. Digging for England.
Oh, good. Well, making the most of the nice weather. That's good to hear.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Very lucky. I'm in Cornwall.
Lovely part of the country to be in. But I wanted to take you back to the mid-70s when you joined the BBC. How did you come to be there in the first place?
I didn't know what to do with myself. I had so many ideas about what I was going to be when I grew up, and I was very fortunate to bump into somebody whose niece had been to the London College of Fashion, and she said, "Why don't you go into television makeup?" And I thought, well, that's a good idea, as if everybody could do it, you know. And I ended up going to the London College of Fashion, and it was something that they prepared people in the very early days with hair, because we do hair and makeup, and so to learn the basics of hair you needed to get a basic training before you went to BBC. So that's how and one of my good friends, she went to the BBC before me, and then I went off and became a psychiatric nurse for a long time. Well, not for a long time, for a few years, and then came back and went to the BBC. And so I was very lucky.
And when you got to the BBC, would it have been a lot of sort of on-the-job training, or was there sort of a hair and makeup course that they sent you on?
There was a course. You were a trainee for 2 years, and you did the basic training, which was brilliant. And then you would be fed into all the day-to-day programs, starting off as the junior, splitting tissues in those days, being very economical, and then gradually you'd go out on shows, and you were allowed to do the weatherman and the news and things like that, and then slowly you built up your repertoire. But it was everyone was just allocated. We were all just put out there. So you'd be doing Top of the Pops one minute and Doctor Who the next. It was just very varied and great fun, because in those early days at the BBC, they'd not long gone to colour, and we just, everything was so exciting. All the studios were full, and it was a very productive place to be, an exciting place to be.
And you mentioned there, an early assisting role would have been Doctor Who alongside Deanne Turner. Was it often used as a show for people to learn on? Because I imagine at some point you inevitably would be allocated to it. Yeah,
it wasn't specifically used as a learning tool, although it would have been. I think mainly the big period dramas were considered to be where you learnt your craft, but things like Doctor Who were probably thought of as children's TV and not terribly important. And that's my memory of it anyway. I think it was definitely under the umbrella of children's.
And with something like that, are you sort of allocated to a designer for a period of time, or is it whichever designer's on the job?
Yeah, it literally would be what fitted in. So the designers could ask for somebody if they wanted to take them on a long job, but mainly you'd be allocated, maybe the designer would ask for their senior assistant, and then everybody else would just be put on it. I think they tried to get us to work with as many people as we could, because you learnt different things from different people.
So people like Deanne and I suppose Anne Briggs, there would have been people that you knew of, but would actually working on a show be the first time you'd work alongside them?
Not necessarily. I could have done Top of the Pops or something like that, or Blue Peter, or they would have been doing all of those type of things, and they'd always have an assistant. So I could have. I actually can't remember now what it was that was the first thing I did with either of them, but because we work with so many, you could work with 5 different designers in a week. Initially, depending on what you were doing.
And in terms of Doctor Who alongside Anne, you would have been away on location a little bit in Dorset for Seeds of Doom, which was a Krynoid sort of human mutation. That must have been early days of prosthetics, surely.
It was. I know that Anne came up with this idea of, we were painting painting the skin with latex and then sticking either Quaker Oats or Rice Krispies or something, pressing it into the skin, and then getting a very thin layer of cotton wool and putting that over the top, all the time putting layers of latex, and then colouring it afterwards with green makeup or green and brown, and just having a wonderful time. And it was quite common at the BBC to get effects with skin texture using cereals, because it can be quite effective. They also, Quaker Oats makes good scabs. And and also when I worked with Lisa Westcott on Survivors, we did small, it wasn't smallpox, but it was a type of pox, and I remember on a black guy, dark skin, and so we used Cocoa Pops with which we covered up with latex, and yes, it was very inventive days. When you were just sort of making it up as you went along.
And I suppose that's also the challenges of being away on location, because these are the days when you haven't got everything that you do today when you're filming away. You've got to work with what you can get or what you've got with you, I suppose.
Well, in part, but the BBC was very well set up, and we would get a list of stock and order it all beforehand, and then it would all be put in big trunks, and we'd go away, and with trunks of kit, and you would have had a prep beforehand, and that would have been all organised. So you would expect to be stuck in the Brecon Beacons or somewhere. You would need to take everything you needed with you. Yes, definitely. It was not easy to get hold of stuff in those days.
So by the time you found yourself designing a Doctor Who, was it quite nice to know how the show works and to have already encountered it before approaching it? Because I imagine it must be quite a complicated one to have worked on.
I don't think we looked at it like that. I would say that every filming you do is the same, that you get to know who you're going away with. You would have had read-throughs, script rehearsals, and so on, that you would have gone along, and so really it's just about team building. So you're put into this team, and then slowly over the course of time you'd all become bonded. But because at the BBC everybody tended to work the same way, it made life quite easy, because you just be doing a different thing. It's like a different book, a different cover. You are doing the same thing but with different people, but it's all the same in a way.
Because I imagine that would have made creative conversations, particularly between yourself and the costume designer, easier, because you already knew each other, even if you hadn't worked together.
Yeah, to a point, that's right. Sometimes costume take the lead in what's occurring. They will be very set in what they're trying to achieve, and you'll be fitting in with that. And other times it's more makeup based, and you know, it's more about trying to make it work with the makeup. But generally it's a collaboration, and we all try and make it work. That's the way it goes.
So,
Except in films, for some reason, in films nowadays, the costume designer seems to be the person that has all the say. It's they get a lot more of a run up, I think, than the makeup team, in my experience. But that it was very different back in the day.
because for your first two as a designer, June Hudson was the costume designer, and everybody, well, a lot of the natives had wigs, beards, facial hair. It must have been a very busy story for you, and also to work alongside June, who always has very strong ideas.
June and I got on really well. She was lovely, and I remember it was all these funny old men that lived in a cave, and I had lots of straggly beards made. Still have some of them in my barn, because you couldn't really use them for anything else. They were particularly straggly. But yes, we got on very well, and I'd like to look back on some of these things, and can't remember enough about them. Yeah, was it the Creatures in the Pit? Was it called something like that?
Yes, yeah, it would have been the creature from the pit, and the sort of main villain of the piece was Myra Francis, with which you gave a sort of wonderful face makeup, the sort of silver paint on the side of the face. Was that your way of sort of making her an alien, or was that, you know, or came from somewhere else?
Yes, it was. I can't remember how it actually occurred, except that perhaps there was some way of tying it in with what she was wearing, or to make her stand out as slightly more significantly. I do remember. Was her costume incorporated, you know, in some way over her head? I can't.
Yes, she had a headdress on, and almost sort of like a lycra that sort of came to about there. So there was very little of her face actually on show.
Yeah. Yes, it would have been some way in trying to tie in the costume, I think, from what I remember.
And with anything, where does the creative conversation start? Do you do your own research separately, or do you talk to the costume designer and work from there?
And initially, you'd have a script read through and get a feeling of the piece, and then we would sit and talk with the costume designer about their ideas of where they were thinking of going with it, and then you'd sit and have a chat with the director about it, see if they had any strong ideas about what they wanted, and you'd then go away and try and come up with something that fulfilled the brief. I did things, a lot of sketch shows, I remember, were quite often quite heavily based on makeup. Dave Allen at Large and Little and Large, all of those shows, half the time they would be writing them with just makeup in their head, and they'd come to you about 2 days before you were due to record in the studio and say, I've had this idea, I'd like to be David Bowie as something, and you'd be running around like a mad thing trying to accommodate their vision at the last minute. There was a lot of last minute vision, which was, and Dave Allen was especially naughty at coming up with things. He changed the whole scene. Oh, and Spike Milligan, I did quite a lot of Spike Milligan's shows, and not as the designer, with Elaine Smith was the designer on Q8 and 9, and I did a series actually with Spike called Melting Pot, which was wiped altogether. It's no longer in existence, about a boarding house in Scotland with a Chinaman who was from Birmingham, and it was too ethnically, it was as mixed as you could make it, and he and John Bird were Indian, I think. And, yes, so for whatever reason someone decided it was not appropriate, and it's no longer in existence. Anyway.
It must have been a joy to work with not only so many comedians, but on shows where it wasn't just one look for a show, it was lots of short, quick looks. That must have been a great challenge each week to come in and do something like that.
Definitely a huge challenge, and also quite often they were in front of a live audience, and so you might have a pre-record where you would record something that was actually physically impossible to turn it round in the time of with a studio audience. But I can remember in one Dave Allen show, we had a turntable, and it was a tableau it was Virgin Mary, Joseph and Mary, the baby in the crib, and all the shepherds and the kings and everybody, and then the whole thing swiveled round, the whole set swiveled round, and it became a nightclub or a saloon bar of some sort. So none of them had all the biblical attire. They had different makeup, and we had to do that in real time while the audience waited for us to change everyone. It was very, very difficult. The whole show but it was great fun, hilarious.
So how would something, like a sitcom, something like Heidi High, that must present its own challenges, but is that a little bit more straightforward than the sketch show format?
Well, with Heidi High, it was very busy, and everybody had wigs and complicated hairdos and etc. But there would be a theme to it. So there would be a theme when they were all dressing up to entertain the campers, and so there'd be all sorts that you were again having to do, and very little time and manpower to do it. But again, it was just something that happened, and Jimmy Perry and David Croft, they were all so professional, and it was actually I think I did the last Heidi High ever, but it had been a long-running thing, so they were a well-oiled machine.
And something like that, obviously, all the characters are caricatures, a little bit over the top.
Yeah.
Do you continue that through in the makeup, or do you treat it as a purely period piece and let the characters exaggerate? You're not putting perhaps overly accentuated features on or something.
I think quite a lot of makeup was worn by everyone. It was that late 50s, early 60s, maybe. But it was, everyone had a very defined look, which was designed by, potentially, I'm not sure, Jill Hager maybe started it off. I don't know, they were established characters anyway. So although I might have had a different wig made for one of the characters, it would basically look the same, roughly the same.
Because I suppose as a designer, you also want to make it your own, but you've got to maintain that continuity. So is it those occasions when they're going to a party or something that they can have a slightly different look? Is that what you perhaps focus more on to make your own?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. You just the character is who they are, and you would stick with that. So unless there was somebody who nobody was happy with the way they looked, and for a reason they needed to change, you just stick with what had been established, and then put your own stamp on it somewhere else.
And that period look is something which continued to your next encounter with Doctor Who alongside Sylvester McCoy. Is there one particular time period that is more interesting, or is that sort of late 50s quite an interesting period in itself?
I like 50s. I would have said that each period has a point where it's interesting, or whether somebody's upper class or lower class, or in those days it was very, especially the 40s and the 50s, everybody took care of themselves. Their hair was always done. Men had short hair, and women always had neat hairstyles. It's very obvious when you look at a picture of today and a picture of then, even if it's a railway station, how neat and tidy everybody was. And I loved that.
But to be given I suppose, a historical Doctor Who, but you still got a bit of science fiction in there, was that quite a nice show to work on, Delta and the Bannermen?
It was really nice to work on, actually. And we had a great cast. And was that Sophie Aldrich? Was that Ace? No. When did Sophie join?
Sophie was the next one, which had been Dragonfire. But in Delta and the Bannermen, you had Ken Dodd, Don Henderson, Sarah Griffiths.
And Bonnie.
And Bonnie, yes.
Yes, lovely Bonnie. She was delightful. She's completely amazing. She's gone through from a child to an adult, being very similar. I don't know, she's incredible energy about her. A really lovely person.
And I suppose we mentioned one of the cast was Ken Dodd, who is only in it briefly, but you can't really disguise Ken Dodd. You just sort of have to go with what he wants. How does that work?
Yeah, I think we pretty much just had to take it as he was. He was fine. I don't remember. Yes, I don't remember either way anything very much about it. It was a very busy show, incredibly busy, and with quite a big cast at times, I think. But I do remember it being very enjoyable, and I think the sun shone, which is always a help.
I suppose particularly when you're filming in a holiday camp by the sea, it's
Yes.
perfect weather for it.
I can remember us having a barbecue on the beach. It was nice. Yes.
And you mentioned earlier, Sophie Aldred was brought in as the companion for the next story, which was all studio bound on a strange ice world. That must have been such a contrast for you.
It was, yes, it was. And they were resurrecting all sorts of characters which they decided were coming through this cafe in space, which that was a challenge in itself, having to go through all the dusty shelves of the visual effects department to try and find things that we could use. And Sophie, it was her first one, and she was just a tomboy, really, and she was lovely. I don't know what happened to Sophie. Does she still act?
She's still busy doing particularly a lot of voiceover work, but yeah, still acting.
Okay, I haven't come across her in a few years. So, but yes, she was just pretty much herself, and her clothes were. I seem to remember her having very little makeup in the scheme of things, and she had quite a nice little bobby hairdo that took care of itself. I don't think she was any trouble.
Because of course these days, you introduce a new regular and there's a lot of scrutiny and it's a big publicity thing. At the time, was it just she is another character within the story, or were you aware that, as you said, it wasn't a great deal, but perhaps Sophie needed a little bit more time and thought than others maybe?
Well, certainly we will have taken quite a lot of care to make her an individual, and I'm sure it was, the brief was that she was a tomboy, and so we kept it pretty safe from makeup's point of view, and it was her clothes that were the most fun. I think she had a biker look. Yes, I think it will have come down from the director initially, that she was going to be playing the part, and that he wanted her to be a tomboy, and in my memory, that's what I think happened with her.
I suppose one of the challenges of that story is that at the end, Edward Peel's character, his face has to melt. I mean, when you read that in the script, that must be a fairly unique challenge to Doctor Who, surely.
Absolutely. I remember him living in the fridge, and then at the end, as you say, when he was unable to get back into the fridge, he melted, which was horrific. And we came up with this idea of a melting head, and I managed to find somebody to sculpt the head, and they made, yes, a cast of his face and then a cast of his head, and it melted. It was incredibly visually brilliant, I thought. They did a marvelous job, and completely made the whole episode. It was very gruesome, though. I think it terrified a lot of children, because it was a children's program, so yes, it was pretty scary stuff.
Yeah, certainly, very effective sequence and setup. So was Doctor Who perhaps overly ambitious for the time and the budgets involved?
I don't think they looked at it like that. Because the early days of prosthetics, etc. I think that people just tried to be inventive.
In any show, that you come into, with established looks, something like EastEnders must have been a wonderful example where, because the nature of a soap opera, there were so many new and regular characters introduced that quite quickly you could make it your own.
Oh, absolutely. Shauna started it off, and I think I was on maternity leave or something, and then I took over. I think about 6 weeks in, and each week, quite literally each week, we would introduce a couple of characters, and one of my best ones was Dot, and I can remember taking June Brown to the hairdresser in it wasn't in Boreham Wood, but it was nearby, and we wanted a look that she could still be June Brown but have a very different look when we set her hair. So she had a nice bob with a fringe, and then we set it all back and we dyed it aubergine, and she pretty much has stuck with that all these years because it worked really well. And Pamson Clements was another one that I had the joy of establishing. She had the most lurid taste in not only earrings but eyeshadow. And, yes, we did have a lot of fun establishing EastEnders, and over the years I used to pop back from time to time and do some double banking, and when they have a big story coming up, sometimes they go off and they record another bit. So over the years I stuck with it for quite a long time, on and off, and have very fond memories because it was exciting days when it started off.
And I imagine, the nature of a soap opera is that it is a machine. It's quite quick to turn around an episode. That must be almost a different way of working, that you've still got to achieve the same quality of your work, but I imagine with less time.
Well, you had two designers working at the same time, and so we used to have 2 days filming on the lot and 3 days in the studio. I think that's how it worked. It might have been 1 day on the lot and 2 days in the studio, and the other designers would be in read-throughs and just prepping anything, taking people to the hairdressers, doing, it was quite a busy time, but it's even busier now because they record every day, and it changed from the initial way of doing it.
But of course, you had a long association with Ian McShane on Lovejoy. How was that as a series to work on?
I just remember that the sun always shines in on the coast up in Suffolk. It was always sunny, and again that was a great show to do because it was a comedy, and a comedy drama, and there were just big teams of people, and we just went like a family from one show to the next, and it was just such beautiful locations everywhere we went, and And a bit like Doc Martin, actually. At Doc Martin, it always looks as if the sun is shining. And I'd like to say it's not always shining in Cornwall, but it does look like it is. And there's nothing like being out on location on a sunny day by the sea or up in Suffolk.
Yes, it certainly shows the UK off at its best. You know, it's a wonderful image of the Southwest in Doc Martin.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. So, but I do think in terms of rainfall, up in Thetford, Norfolk, Suffolk, they have less rain than we do in Cornwall by a long way.
So was Lovejoy perhaps a standout job amongst everything you've done?
Well, certainly it was good fun. We did go to we went to North Carolina and did a lovely shoot there for a Christmas special to Wilmington, and we got about quite a bit, and I just remember it being very happy times, and it was quite relaxed, and so we were all in cottages, and the children could come and stay in their holidays, and it was one of those jobs that you made it work for you, and especially when you've got a family. And work-wise, I don't remember it being particularly taxing. Everyone was easy to look after. Lovely Phyllis Logan. It doesn't get much better, does it?
Oh, sounds like a very happy job, and always nice to get a little bit of travel as well out of these things.
Absolutely, yes, definitely. We went to Prague as well. That was a great one because it was just after the Russians had left in about 89. It was very. We stayed in this huge hotel which had nylon carpets, and everyone was static, and you all got electric shocks wherever you went. We all got rashes from the starch. They starched the sheets, and you'd have to turn the bed back and it creak, snap the sheet in half because it was so much starch. And then, yes. Anyway, I'm sure nobody wants to hear about it. Yeah. But anyway, it was jolly nice to go to Prague, and we went to some amazing places that you couldn't go if you weren't filming, and that I think is often what happens. We're so lucky in the job that you end up in the most amazing places that don't have normal public access, and we were in the crypt of a cathedral, and it was just incredible.
Oh, well, it certainly sounds like you saw the sights of Prague and many other places, no doubt.
Yes, definitely.
More recently, you are a freelancer now rather than BBC staff. How different is it as a freelancer? I imagine it's the same techniques and sort of work. Does it, you've not got that community of people that you had at Television Centre?
No. We were incredibly lucky. We had at the BBC, we had the wig store, we had the visual effects department, we had costume on our doorstep, we had all the reference that you could imagine, reference libraries, and it made life very easy by comparison. But today we've got the internet, so we can do a lot of prep on the internet quite quickly. And although I have designed series since leaving the BBC, I tend nowadays to do dailies on big films when they're busy, because I can dip in and out a bit more. And I love I love going out to work, and I love the fact it's always different. And I think that's the reason that I'm still doing the job all these years later, is because there isn't anything better. It's great fun.
Oh, well, I think that's an absolutely lovely note to end on. So I'd just like to say thanks very much for your time, Gillian. It's been, lovely to talk to you about some of your work, and I know there's an awful lot more we haven't touched upon, but thank you.
Okay. Nice to talk to you.